There's a small settlement in the Capital Wasteland, sitting alone on a broken highway bridge. 4 houses, a handful of survivors, and every single one of them is terrified of the dark, because something has been hunting them, taking them one by one, and the people responsible call themselves the family. This is the story of Arefu, and the closest thing Fallout has ever come to a real vampire story. Arefu is easy to miss if you're not paying attention. It's a small settlement built on top of an elevated section of the Beltway, accessible only by a ramp on the south side of the bridge. 4 houses and 1 abandoned building make up the entire town. There's a small detail at the entrance worth pointing out. A damaged road sign stands near the settlement. Originally it would have read, "Careful," but 2 centuries of decay have worn away the C and the L, leaving only the letters that spell out the town's name, Arefu. It's a clever bit of environmental storytelling. The wasteland itself is quite literally warning you before you even arrive. The settlement is led by a man named Evan King, and the town exists in a near constant state of fear. They've been enduring repeated raids from a mysterious group living somewhere nearby. Survivors are picked off, people go missing in the night, and nobody in Arefu has been able to stop it. Evan King, desperate, will ask the lone wanderer for help dealing with the threat. And that's where things start to get strange, because the group responsible for these attacks isn't a raider gang, or mutants, or any of the usual wasteland threats. They call themselves the family, and they believe they're vampires. The family lives in the ruins of Meresti Station, an old train yard not far from Arefu. They're led by a man named Vance, and Vance's story is the key to understanding everything about this group. The truth is unsettling, but it's not supernatural. The family are not actual vampires. They're cannibals, survivors who, for reasons the game never fully explains, developed an overwhelming craving for human blood and flesh. Left unchecked, that hunger made them outcasts, feared, hunted, unable to live among ordinary wasteland survivors. Vance found a way to give that horror a shape that felt less monstrous. Drawing from classic vampire literature and folklore, he started teaching his fellow cannibals to see themselves differently, not as mindless monsters driven by hunger, but as vampires, disciplined, controlled, following a code. He even established rules for the group to live by, modeled after classic vampire fiction discipline around when and how they fed, an insistence on civility, and an attempt to replace senseless violence with something more structured. It's a strange, almost tragic act of self-reinvention. Cannibalism reframed as ritual, monstrosity reframed as identity. It's worth pausing here, because Bethesda wasn't subtle with the references. Arefu is itself named after a real village in Romania, a town located near Bran Castle, more commonly known as Dracula's Castle. The connection to vampire folklore isn't incidental. It's the entire foundation of the location's design. Even some of the smaller details lean into it. There's a password required to access certain areas, tied to the family, that translates to a term referencing bats, a deliberate nod to one of the most enduring vampire symbols in folklore and fiction. The family even avoids daylight, sticking to their underground station and rarely surfacing except to feed. Another direct nod to vampire mythology, even though the game makes clear sunlight has no actual special effect on them. It's all aesthetic, all performance, a group of desperate, hungry people who found meaning by becoming characters in a story that wasn't really theirs. Here's where the story stops being simple. During the family's most recent raid on Arefu, they captured a young man named Ian West and brought him back to Meresti Station. On the surface, it looks like just another kidnapping, another victim taken by monsters in the dark, but the truth is much darker and much sadder. Ian wasn't simply a victim. He had recently killed his own parents, overwhelmed by the same cannibalistic urges that drive the family. When Vance found him, he didn't see a kidnapping victim. He saw someone who belonged with his people, someone who needed exactly the kind of structure and identity Vance had built the family around. This single detail completely reframes the conflict. Arefu isn't simply a town of innocent victims being terrorized by outside monsters. One of their own already carried the same affliction. He just hadn't acted on it yet, until he did, and fled to the one place that could understand what he'd become. This is where the quest Blood Ties comes in, and it's one of the more morally interesting side quests in Fallout 3, precisely because there's no obvious right answer. The lone wanderer is given the opportunity to broker peace between Arefu and the family, rather than simply choosing a side and eliminating the other. If approached correctly, a deal can be struck. Arefu agrees to provide donated blood packs to the family on a regular basis, giving Vance's people a way to satisfy their hunger without raiding the town for victims. In exchange, the family leaves Arefu alone, and in some versions of the agreement, even protects the settlement instead of preying on it. It's a quietly profound resolution. Instead of treating the family as simply evil and stamping them out, the quest offers a version of coexistence. Feed the hunger safely, and the violence stops. It just finds a way to live alongside it instead of pretending it can be eliminated entirely. Of course, the player doesn't have to choose peace. Arefu's people can be convinced to wipe out the family by force instead, ending the threat permanently through violence rather than compromise. Either path is available, and either path says something different about how you think the wasteland should handle the things it doesn't fully understand. If the lone wanderer sides with Arefu and decides to eliminate the family outright, the encounter unfolds very differently. The family will defend themselves. They're not eager for conflict, but they won't simply allow themselves to be slaughtered without resistance. Vance, Robert, and the others fight back, and the resulting confrontation can turn deadly for both sides. It's worth noting that taking this path forecloses an interesting opportunity available through the peaceful resolution. Speaking with Vance afterward allows the player to learn his version of the ways of the vampire, receiving a perk that lets you regain health by consuming blood packs. It's a small mechanical reward, but a meaningful narrative one too. Walking away from peace doesn't just mean lost potential allies. It means losing the chance to understand them at all. To really appreciate what makes the family special, it helps to look at how Fallout typically handles its monsters, because almost none of them get this kind of nuance. Take feral ghouls. They're former humans too, twisted by radiation into mindless, violent creatures. But the game gives them no real inner life to explore. They're simply a threat to survive, no different narratively from a rad scorpion or a mole rat. Their tragedy exists in the abstract, not in any individual story you actually get to engage with. Super mutants get slightly more depth, especially through characters like Fox, who retains his intelligence and personality despite his transformation. But even then, the broader super mutant population is mostly portrayed as a faceless horde, a result of FEV experimentation, rather than a community wrestling with what they've become. The family is different. Every member has a name, a role within their tiny community, a backstory you can actually engage with through dialogue. Vance isn't just a cannibal leader. He's a man actively trying to build dignity and structure out of something the rest of the wasteland sees as pure horror. That's a level of characterization Fallout rarely affords to anything labeled a monster. It puts the family in a strange, fascinating middle ground. Not quite victims, not quite villains, just people coping with something monstrous in the most human way they know how, by telling themselves a story that makes it bearable. There's another angle worth exploring here, what Arefu and the family reveal about how justice actually works in the wasteland, or rather, how it doesn't. There's no police force coming to investigate Arefu's missing residents, no court system to weigh whether the family's hunger excuses their violence, no higher authority capable of enforcing any resolution at all. The entire conflict, and its entire resolution, rests on whichever wandering stranger happens to walk through with enough charisma, ammunition, or patience to broker a deal or end one side permanently. That's true of most of Fallout, but it's especially stark here. In a functioning society, Ian West's case would likely involve psychological evaluation, sentencing, maybe institutionalization. In the Capital Wasteland, his fate depends entirely on one conversation with one traveler who happened to wander by. It's a quiet reminder of just how fragile civilization actually is 200 years after the bombs. Not because people aren't trying to rebuild some version of order. Evan King clearly wants to protect his town, and Vance clearly wants structure for his people, but because there's no larger system left to enforce any of it. Everything comes down to individual choices, made by individual people, with no safety net underneath any of them. So why does this small, easily missable settlement matter in the bigger picture of Fallout storytelling? Because the family represents something Fallout does better than almost any other series, taking a familiar horror trope and grounding it in genuine human tragedy. These aren't supernatural monsters. They're not cursed or infected by some pre-war virus or twisted by radiation like so many other wasteland threats. They're just people who developed an uncontrollable hunger, and instead of being destroyed by it, found a fragile, strange way to keep living with it. Vance's vampire mythology isn't really about blood at all. It's about giving shame and horror a structure that makes survival possible. A story people tell themselves so the truth becomes bearable. And Arefu, sitting quietly above them on its broken bridge, becomes a perfect mirror. Ordinary survivors just trying to get by, suddenly forced to confront the fact that monsters and victims aren't always such different things. Sometimes they're neighbors, sometimes they're family in more ways than one. Arefu and the family are easy to walk past in Fallout 3. No big questline forces you here, no major faction depends on the outcome. But underneath that small bridge settlement is one of the most quietly thoughtful stories in the entire game, a tale about hunger, shame, identity, and the surprisingly human cost of monstrosity. Sometimes the Wasteland's scariest stories aren't about radiation or mutation at all. Sometimes they're just about people, trying to survive whatever they've become. If you want more Fallout lore breakdowns like this, subscribe and let me know what you want covered next.